And when I say atmospheric optics, I'm really talking about just the beautiful things we see when we look up in the sky, whether it's the brilliance of a sunset, or a rainbow, or even the sky itself being blue. We have to understand a little bit about radiation, which we've already covered in previous lectures, and if you don't remember talking about that, I recommend going back and reviewing your notes on radiation or reviewing some of my older videos on it. But for now, I do want to start this discussion with a brief review and a little bit more detail about the idea of an energy budget. So, if you recall from our discussion on radiation, and again, go back and look over it if you don't remember this, our energy, the energy we receive from the sun, is budgeted out. Very similarly to if you had a financial budget. So, for example, you have income and you have spending, and that's your budget, in a real sense. So, here is a detailed version of Earth's energy budget. And this should look a little familiar, but there's a little bit more of a breakdown to it. So let's talk about incoming sunlight. So that's also referred to as either solar radiation or often also referred to as shortwave radiation. Of this shortwave radiation that comes in, 70% of it is absorbed by our Earth and atmosphere. And this is ultimately what heats us up. Of this 70%, 51% is absorbed by the ground. So 51% of all the sunlight that enters the atmosphere ends up being absorbed by the ground. Meanwhile, another 19% is absorbed by the atmosphere, the gases in the atmosphere, so the nitrogen, the oxygen, the different gases, carbon dioxide, water vapor, and so on. And then a large portion is also absorbed by clouds. Now, we've already talked a lot about this in our discussion on radiation, and I also talked a little bit about this concept called albedo. That deals with the other 30%. And this 30% is either reflected or scattered. Of this 30%, 20% is reflected by clouds, and 4% is reflected by the ground. However, there's another 6% that we haven't really talked about yet. Now, before we continue on, I would like you to just take a moment, pause, write down these numbers. I hate this word, but I'm going to recommend it anyway. Memorize these numbers, and they will come key when the next quiz comes, the next assignment comes, and when the midterm comes. So you definitely want to have these numbers in the back of your pocket. With that said, here's just a detailed breakdown of this budget. So we have 100 units of incoming solar radiation. Of those 100 units, 51 are absorbed by the ground, 19 by the atmosphere and clouds, 4% are reflected off the surface of the Earth, 20% are reflected off of clouds, and then the remaining 6% are reflected off of other things in the atmosphere. And this happens through a process called scattering. So with that said, what does this actually produce, this reflection or scattering of sunlight? Well, it produces things like this. This is what's called a blue flash, and it happens during sunset. You also get beautiful views like this. In this view, it looks like rays of sunlight are coming through the clouds. It almost looks divine in a way. It's very awe-inspiring. Now, with that said, these are just a few of the many different beautiful atmospheric optics that we're going to talk about in this lecture.